Yep, let's do it.
Sweet. Very good. That's not to say let's not introduce each other. So I don't know, Elizabeth, you actually also have a background looking at the connection between piecework and economics. So that might be a really great segue if you want to introduce that.
Yeah, so I'll just start by introducing myself so you kind of know my context of how I came into this. So I'm a mediator by training, and I have a bachelor's degree in peace studies, and I got that from Goucher College in Baltimore. So I was frequenting Occupy Baltimore meetings. I was going to meetings with the Baltimore Zeitgeist group, the local currency, the Beano group. Last year, I completed the point of contact training for the Venus Project and just have not heard back from them since completing that. They have their own structural things they're dealing with too. And I actually had the privilege to, I was trying to minor in economics. I just couldn't quite get the credits to fit in because peace studies was so expansive and I had to study abroad for a semester as well. And then because of that privilege, I did make my senior capstone in peace studies about monetary policy. So I've done some really good academic research in that, was able to create that into a presentation. And then I've given 2 iterations of that presentation and then moved back to Denver and got disconnected from all of that. And in my grief of being disconnected from that, couldn't bring myself to find what might exist in Denver, but I'm happy to be connected to Deacon and to you all and to start kind of getting connected to that locally again.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have anything bubbling up? Cool. So I was hoping today, I intend to have this series, at least through phase 1 of the favor, organizing. And the idea of the series is to talk about, why this is even a thing that I'm doing, because it's not directly healthcare related. It's not going to, there's no toilet paper necessarily involved. There's, whatever, like the things that people are feeling, it doesn't make people staying at home alone less lonely, not immediately. So like, why jump to this? And so I'm hoping that having these like discussions can really get into some cool economic stuff, and that making it conversational is going to help. The last economic project I was in, we produced some media, but it was all very like outward, and we had some events where we talked to people. We didn't really produce much content that could like disseminate or anything like that, and that I think was a part of the mistake. And so anyway, so that's the basic intention. My idea for this particular session was to see if we could just talk about the nature of money and like have that as like a centerpiece. And then, so I was hoping to kind of like do that for, I don't know, maybe even just like 10, 20 minutes and then see where it goes from there. Does that sound good for all you guys?
Sure.
Sweet. So
yeah,
awesome. And I know that like Jamie, you've got a washing machine, and Lexa, you've got data to analyze, and so we're all excellent. Oh, that's awesome. You can do. I don't know how to do that. The thumbs up emoji and the thing. That's a pretty sweet little thing. You have to show me how to do that. Yeah. So money. When we look at money in economics, one of the best definitions I've ever come across is this twofold thing, and the 2 factors that make money are that it's a unit of exchange and it's a store of value. And one of the things that's interesting about that definition is that a lot of things that have been used for money throughout time are stronger or weaker in one of those categories than another. And it's not necessarily that the more of a store of value a thing is, the less it's a unit of exchange. Like that's not necessarily like a hard law, but it seems to be the case, and it seems to be more the case when the dominant currency is somewhat inflationary. That's a whole pile of words. But the unit of exchange aspect just means that people can trade it as a go-between for anything. So if you think about like barter, it's like I've got, bread, somebody else has socks, I want socks, he wants bread, we swap. But let's say I've got bread, somebody else has socks, I don't need socks, but that guy still wants bread. Somebody else wants socks. So we have like this, we could try to arrange all of the multilateral trades. It gets really, really bonkers hard. And the other thing that gets really, really hard is, let's just say I'm a cattle rancher. So I've got a whole cow and I want a pair of socks. Well, that's really tough. Even if I want socks and that guy wants some beef, it's like, well, I'm not going to give this guy a whole cow and I don't want hundreds of pairs of socks. Like that's like, if the equivalent value in socks for beef is just, it's nuts. And this cow's not dead yet, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a weird metaphor because maybe like one steak for a pair of socks, like that'd be good. But a lot of things have differences in value, and so a thing is a better unit of exchange if it can be subdenominated, right? So that's where we get change, we get different sizes of bills, that the denominations and the subdivision is a thing that makes a thing a good unit of exchange. You can break it out. So people used to use salt. Salt subdivides really well. Coins, obviously, you can stack them. You can old Chinese coins, they strung on ropes. They might still have coins that string on ropes. That's really handy for coins. I don't know why other cultures didn't figure out putting a hole in the middle of coins so you could put it on a rope. But like also, then those ropes are really easy for counting, and so that helps with the divisions. So there are lots of things people have done to make sure that money is a convenient unit of exchange. Ledgers, obviously, if you don't even have to have a physical money, a ledger is the best unit of exchange. I'm a big fan of it, although I really like paper artifacts and coins. So that's one side of money. The other side of money is that it is a store of value. So we go back to like the bread example or the beef example. You get this interesting thing where like what a loaf of bread is worth, what a specific loaf of bread is worth today, not loaves of bread in general, but a specific loaf of bread, it is not going to be worth that a week from now. That loaf of bread is going to be worthless, like either because it was eaten or because it went stale or because it went moldy. It's not going to retain its value. The money itself retains its value. And so we look in the past, gold, I mentioned salt already, those things retain their value. Hypothetically, I mean, gold doesn't change, in its physical structure. How much people value those things can change, but the thing itself, the intrinsic value, can't change of, those types of commodity that have been used in the place of money. So the fact that a thing doesn't change is very important to its moneyness, like the degree of moneyness. I'm gonna go ahead and just completely stop there. Do we have any thoughts on units of exchange and stores of value? Anything that seems pertinent to dig into?
Deacon, I actually think that your beef cattle sock analogy was really well articulated, and moving forward, if you were trying to explain this to other lay people, I think that's a perfectly adequate one to stick with. Just so you can log that.
Sweet, thank you.
I jump in. One thing I read, I'm wondering if anybody is familiar with this book. It's a Debt, the First 5,000 Years. It's by David Graeber.
I've heard of it. I've meant to read it. I'm gonna stick it on in my notes. Keep going.
Yeah, there's a specific section in there which I think is very interesting, especially to consider about the framing of money as a stand-in for the barter economy. Because there's a section in which he describes, well, he explains that like there is a myth of barter which
Mhm.
is that like barter is what preceded money.
Yeah.
And actually, that's not entirely true. I think it's kind of a repeated story that like is repeated by economists to explain why money exists. But and I'm not gonna like, well, I don't know. I don't have like a good snippet to like take and like represent to you from that. But just that like this story has been repeated many times. To and there's many evidence. There's much evidence of like societies that don't operate on a barter like economy,
Yeah.
and so like it's not. I don't know. I guess I want to like clarify, like just like be careful about the framing of what is the origin of money, that it somehow comes out of like an attempt to solve the barter problem, when
Mhm.
like there's very clear examples. One of the examples is like the what is this, the Iroquois Native Americans who stockpiled goods, and then female councils allocated the goods, and they relied on gift economies, and that's
Yeah.
how they allocated their goods.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just a note.
No, it's a wonderful note, and it's a great transition to moving into the discussion of like where money comes from in society, because the analogy of the barter problem is it's a mechanical description, and it has been put forward as though it were an anthropological description of human life, and it's not. I mean, it's just it's a description of like, if like, you know, it's an analogy. If one were to want to trade cattle for socks, you know, here's how this could be problematic, or could be interesting, or could be ameliorated. So in my work, what I've come across, having not read that book, but having seen a lot of the anthropological writings, the it's one. I'm really bad with acronyms. The IJCCR has, there are many different articles. So the IJCCR, it's an academic journal, and so the studies that I'm assuming are being drawn from that book come up frequently in the reports that exist there. Also, Charles Eisenstein references that particular like misnomer in anthropology in both The Ascent of Man and in his subsequent books, which follow, certainly in Sacred Economics. And what we tend to find is that in societies that remain within what in permaculture we refer to as that zone of trust space, where essentially if you can look at people, and even if you don't remember their name, but you basically know who they are, or you know their reputation, like, and for everybody in your society. So if you have a village, you know, a tribe, where all of the people you're interacting with in terms of resources are people that you see most days, you're never going to develop money, because at that stage where reputation is ubiquitous and known, money is just in the way, right? And this seems to be fairly consistent. Now, what we see when there are a lot of those tribes peacefully existing in a region is that some form of money system will frequently crop up for inter-tribe relations. And that's so where we see like with in the Americas, we have, you know, the things that were used for currencies were like large, where it's like when we talk about wampum, and wampum is like basically any really pretty thing. So this would be like gems, this would be really nice beads, handcrafts. But then for other trades, you would use, you know, once the horses were introduced, you'd use horses. But there are no like small denominations of money in those exchanges, because the only time trade was happening in a like in a sort of a monetized way, it's between like, it's like big trades even if it's between two individuals, it's two individuals from separate tribes. So they're coming together maybe like once a year or once in a season and making trades. And so you don't need change. And that's the kind of thing we see anthropologically when people live in small groups and maintain their lives within their zone of trust. I see that Jez froze and most of the people have their cameras turned off. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, so
Yes.
you can hear me. Oh, sweet. Okay, it was just an image.
Yep.
Cool.
Good.
Does that sound good? Does it sound like what are you guys thinking about, like that notion of like you don't need money inside the zone of trust? Money starts to come up, or does anybody have any other examples or thoughts on how that relates to us today? That money springs up and becomes important once you don't know people.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, I've heard stories about different bands in, I want to say, Northeast Africa, where their gift economies existed in such a way that it actually would have been a negative thing to not have debt. Like, we would call that debt, but for their culture it meant this, like, this bond, like this, like, still needing to, like, give something to someone else meant there was this, like, relationship, like it had everything to do with the strength of your interconnectedness, is guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And has anybody here ever read any portion of Benjamin Franklin's autobiography? He had this really cool way of diffusing enmity, where if he knew that somebody didn't like him, he would ask them for a favor.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I think that's an effort too, because I want to, like, get us a little bit into the experience of that, because I think we're doing a really good job of, like, saying how this works theoretically. And Lexa, I really appreciate that example from, like, in other cultures, it can be an indebtedness, can be a bond and a connection to community. It's not always a negative thing. For me, like, I like to bring it back to, like, I have this very close friend. She's like a sister to me. And every time we go out together, only one of us pays. We don't both pay for the meal. One of us is going to just take the whole check. And our understanding with each other is that we're going to be friends for our whole lives. And so you pay when you can, and I'll pay when I can. And we're not, like, keeping a ledger. And if we had kept a ledger, it would get in the way of that trust that we have with each other, because it's almost saying, like, oh, well, I'm keeping track because we always have to come back to zero. Being able to just sort of let that ledger go and be in that relationship and say, you know what, I maybe have more of a capacity to pay this time, so let me get the check. I don't even remember who paid last time we hung out, but that's what closeness feels like. And I've also been in the flip side situation where I've been in kind of a new friendship, and they expected, I paid for the bill the first time, but then they never paid the bill the second time. They just kept expecting me to pay. And I was like, what? Excuse me? Like, no, I'm not, like, taking it. This happens in dating too. People are like, should we go Dutch? Or, like, should I pay? Or should the man pay? Or who should pay? And, it's become this situation where, like, in the zone of trust, it not being there is actually this really beautiful way of expressing that trust. And then in new relationships, it gets in the way of building that trust, because it's this very rigid ledger. And there's all these very rigid societal expectations about who in relationships should pay, and it's actually gotten in the way of, like, it's ruined a first date for me, right? Where, like, I've insisted that we go Dutch. I'm like, let me pay for my half, and he's like, no, I want to pay. Like, that's the expectation on a man. And then then I'm like, but I asked to pay for my half, and we have this, like, weird tussle when, like, we're both trying to show that we value the relationship and we want to go on a second date. But because we had to address this, like, super awful situation, we never got to the second date because we were so tied up in the transaction and how it should go down, versus my close friend and I, who have just completely thrown that out the window.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. And relatedly, I have a policy where I won't live with anybody who has like a claim to like a shelf in the fridge, you know? Or like, it's like if the food is in the house, it's in the house. You know, if you need to have your own personal food for like medical reasons, anything like that, obviously I'm going to understand. And you always want to be respectful. You know, if you notice that like you've got like, you know, a roommate who like buys this one kind of chocolate bar and has like a moment with it, it's just like, cool, I'm not going to touch that. Like, you have to be sensible about these things, right? But like writing names on things and that kind of thing, it's just like, what is this, like some corporate break room? Like, you know, this is where we live, this has to be a home. And if you do things like that, it's not a home. You know, it's like you're back in a dormitory, and I can't live like that. And it's out of the same kind of sense of like, what zone are we in terms of economic interaction? And so, yeah, I think that's a really important piece to understanding money, is that it is only because of the scale of society. And it doesn't mean that like we like being outside of the zone of trust does not mean distrust. You know, like it's non-trust. It's just not knowing. It's, you know, not knowing. If you don't know somebody, you don't assume the worst of them. You don't assume the best of them. You just don't know, right? And that's what money is for, is like someone is showing you, here are my certificates that I gave value to somebody else's life. I will give you these certificates in exchange for the value you're going to add to my life. And then you can give those certificates to anyone who you want to add value to your life. And that's all it is this way for people who don't know each other to signal that they helped somebody else at some point that might not have known them. Which is also to say that it is not wrong, obviously. This probably should go without saying, but I think this is going on the internet. The internet's going to ream me if I don't add this. Totally giving things to people you don't know is great. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But giving things to people you don't know as a habit without limitation is a flaw, really. Because it leads to dependence. It leads to poor self-image on their part. It leads to going broke yourself and not having any power to help people that, you know, you have responsibility for. And so, you know, I genuinely believe that, like, you know, Muhammad said, you should give 2% of your income away, and that's like it's a good amount for everybody to just give away. And that's not like tithing to like the church or, you know, the mosque or anything like that. It's just to no one you know. Just give it away to random people who you have no connection to, who are never going to pay you back. That is going to keep you healthy. It's not even for their benefit. It's just, that's just the bare minimum, or that's the approximate amount that a person should give just to stay okay as a human being. And so I'm not speaking against giving. And I'm not even speaking against, if you can live in a space where your entire economy is based on giving because there's trust, however it's formed and whatever scale that's at, that's fantastic. But that's circumstantial. We get in this thing a lot in society where we think that that's an individual person can just choose that. And if an individual person does attempt to choose that for themselves, they become powerless to help people. There was I'm forgetting his name. There was this guy who, he ended up living in a cave like near Moab. He decided to live without money and not like have
Mark Sunbeam. Mark Sunbeam.
Mark Sunbeam.
Or no, sorry. Mark Sunbeam is the author who wrote the book about the guy.
Okay,
the guy is, yeah, his name is David Suelo, like soil in Spanish. David Suelo.
Thank you. I knew somebody would know. But you get this thing where, yeah, this guy's probably living an existentially really fantastic life, and there are things that will be learned, but who can he do what for? You know, whereas lots of people, myself included, have like criticisms of somebody like Tony Robbins, like very few, but some. But what I can't criticize is that this year he fed millions of people who circumstantially could not get food on their own. Like, I can't criticize that. And he could do that because he's not giving away everything he has. He gives away a proper percentage that allows him to continue having the capacity and to build capacity in the world to do good things, you know? And it really is, if you ever look into, thank you, Jamie, for noting that. If you ever look into like just the philanthropy of, you know, people like, I'm listing some specifics because I think there's also some false philanthropy that happens. And I don't want to make this about criticizing people, but the people that I think have shown the most exemplary philanthropy in terms of wealthy people, Tony Robbins, Jackie Chan, Warren Buffett. It's actually astounding the things they've accomplished because they make money. And like, you know, Warren Buffett has given away like something, it's like between 80 and 90% of all the money he's ever made, you know, which you think about that, it's kind of staggering. So anyway, that's giving, gift economics. That's my little rant on that. Anybody have anything to add about giving and the gift in general? Go for it.
Well, I have this thought that they can never give enough. That's what comes to mind, is they can never give enough. And
Same.
that like money, like, so if Tony Robbins, I don't know much about Tony Robbins really, but like is giving all this money to feed hungry people. And those people don't have food. There's a reason those people don't have food. And it's not because they don't have the money. It's actually because there's a system that's called capitalism, which is actually excluding people from access to those resources. And it's actively wasting resources, like destroying them through war, through profit, through the profit motive. And it's creating like want, where they're legitimately like, we could totally feed everyone on Earth. But there's something holding us back. And honestly, I think that is the structure of capitalism, which is doing that. And so those individuals who are, you know, benevolent, they're doing what they can to like give money to the people who are going to feed those people. They're also not challenging the system of capitalism that enables that exclusion. That's my feeling.
That varies. Whether or not they are challenging capitalism, it varies by individual, right?
Well, I think the thing is Warren Buffett like working with a group of other people to like eliminate capitalism?
Not to eliminate capitalism, but there's an interesting thing.
So that's the problem. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, okay,
it's like an individual action.
It varies.
It is not going to stop the problems of capitalism. It takes a collective effort. And so Warren Buffett can give away hundreds, you know, billions of dollars or whatever, but it's a money pit. Capitalism is a money pit. It's designed to eat it.
Yeah, I love it. And that's like the next, like I'm talking about money in general, to slowly funnel into where money comes from in capitalism, which is that, so this is like the foreshadowing, which is wonderful. I do want to,
let's go. We're on the path, I guess.
We're on the path. I do want to note, just to throw Warren Buffett another bone. I happen to be like a Buffett fan, but in terms of what he is actually doing in addition to philanthropy, to at least diminish capitalism or the negative effects of capital. I wouldn't even say that Warren Buffett is opposed to capitalism. It'd be really difficult to say that. But
no, I don't think he is.
Yeah, I mean,
that's his job. I mean, it's his whole brand.
Yeah, but he's also a huge proponent of strong labor laws, and he wrote the Bezos bill to try to stop Amazon from, you know, abusing their laborers, from running people dry, the like wind sprint style like workflow in Amazon factories, he looked at all these things and he was just like, this is absurd. We need better labor laws. And yeah, he's a capitalist, and I don't agree with capitalism. But I also try to be a person who, recognizes value where I see it, so that I'm not creating another ism. So I can say, like, here's a person who believes in this ism, and they did this cool thing. They invented this cool mechanic, this set of labor laws that's very reasonable and more reasonable than what was on the books. And I see value in that. And that person happened to be a capitalist. And so, I don't know, I think like kind of, sometimes I think we get this thing where people, in an effort to decry capitalism, will throw Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos in the same bucket when like they couldn't be more different from each other, and that's like that's just like I don't know, a big part of, if I have a message, it is this, like, let's assume good faith unless someone has actively destroyed good faith. And when we have an individual who works as hard as they can to further what they believe is right, let's disagree with them in the most respectful way possible, and see the value in what it is that they are doing. That's my piece. It's kind of like my, like,
Well, and I want to kind of piggyback on that, because I do think it's important to not judge people for playing. I feel like it's more of that don't hate the player, play the game thing.
Yeah,
like
I get you.
I think, when you're talking about the difference between Warren and Bezos, they are different. But I think what's really helped me with some of that kind of like hate towards people in the 1% and like, why don't you just do something, is this kind of like, can you really expect a human to go against something that's benefiting them so much? Like we say, don't bite the hand that feeds you. And that's a totally reasonable thing to tell people, right? If you are getting rewarded by something, are you really going to go against it? And if you do, that's kind of odd. Why would you? And so I've kind of tried to get rid of expectation for the 1% and like judgment of the 1%, even though I still hold that like resentment that was like so well. I think there was like this welling up of it during Occupy. Everyone's like, this is evil. Like, this is so bad, that the wealth disparity is so big. You have all this power and you're just letting all these people suffer. And like, all of that's still true. And I'm still very mad about that. But like, that kind of resentment wasn't really serving me. And I don't think it gets those people to the table. And I don't think it's a fair expectation to be like, hey, you live this incredible lifestyle. You wield an incredible amount of power. Of course, you're not going to turn around and say, screw the system that gave me this power, right? Like, screw that. And that's a question. And this is sort of a parallel to this. Like, people of color ask white people all the time, like, why don't you denounce your white privilege? Why can't you like fight this system of racism? And I still want you to fight the system of racism. I still want accomplices and allies, and I want those in white people. But I also have to be compassionate about like someone who's white, who's like, why would I fight a system that privileges me? That's actually a sane person. Like, that's not evil and mean necessarily. It's just sort of like, yeah, why would I ask you to actively dismantle a system that privileges you? It's easy for me to be like, screw racism. I hate it. It's awful. White privilege doesn't, is awful because I don't get any. But if I'm on the receiving end of that privilege, am I going to be that angry about white privilege? Can you expect me to be that angry about it? Is that fair?
I thank you. I'm sensing a debate latent, and I'm actually honestly torn between like opening that floodgate and staying on topic. like strongly torn, because that's a juicy one. It's so good. But I do hope to make a good video about money. Can we bookmark it? What do you guys say?
Oh, this is all part of it. I mean,
okay.
I would just say this is all part of it, but
yeah.
You have a kind of agenda where you want to guide us or something.
I do. I have a plan.
Yeah. I agree that that is juicy and certainly worthy of discussion. And then B, there's there's something to be said about focus. And if other people are watching this down the line for some kind of continuity, then focusing on monetary policy or monetary history seems smart. But yeah, a lot of things that you and Elizabeth have just been saying have definitely been ringing some bells for me. And just thinking about the conflicts that you come up against so often about capitalism and its merit, and people, and yeah, like the discussion about billionaires. And well, if you're really trying to do the most good possible, should you limit your personal wealth? Like, does that mean that you won't be able to do as much good? Sure, there's definitely like a philosophical and practical argument to be made on both sides there. And then another thing that I think is really important for the long term is that most of the opposition that I've ever seen against like a valid critique of capitalism is just simply the fact that people don't want to hear it because they don't have a viable alternative. So they're not willing to accept any type of valid criticism because that's going against the dominant narrative. And if you go to a place like Sweden, for instance, where kind of social democracy and socialism is the dominant narrative, culturally, just on a social level, people are similarly averse to any criticism of socialism. Like if you go public with a critique of, hey, maybe there's something about this system that is not working, you'll kind of come up against a really similar resistance against that culture, because that is the dominant thing. That is what makes their culture possible. And you're going to have all these people that are going to point to things and come up with these kind of fallacious arguments sometimes and say, well, if you didn't have this system, then you wouldn't be able to do this. You know, Same with capitalism. The most common thing that you hear, if it weren't for capitalism, you wouldn't be talking on Zoom right now. You wouldn't have an iPhone in your pocket. You wouldn't have electric heat in your home. And so it's like, we have to be able to honestly talk about the positive sides of something as well as the negative sides, because otherwise you're not going to receive any trust from your opposition, right?
Absolutely.
What Elizabeth said about bringing people to the table.
Yeah. And that is one of my big reasons for trying to find strong value in the things that people do well. Like, I mean, earlier I was speaking out against Wix, right? But I have to throw in, like, those guys can program. They're really good programmers, and you know. And I'm gonna say
with Wix. Wait.
Oh, yeah. I guess
I don't know. Maybe I'm starting beef. I don't want to start beef.
No, it's fine. It's super simple. Everybody that owns Wix is from Unit 8200. So it's an intelligence division within the Israeli government, and it's not, and this is not like any kind of like a anti-Jew thing. Certainly, this is about Israeli military policy mostly, because Unit 8200 is responsible for doing things like, you know, targeting, you know, suborbit laser strikes, white phosphorus gas strikes, like all those things. That's their direct responsibility for hacking other countries, and like, and then when they are discharged, because it's a part of their citizenship agreement there, so they get out. These guys are done with their careers, you know, around like 27. They leave and they all go into business with each other and fund each other's tech startups, because they're some of the best programmers in the world. And so saying all of those things I believe are wrong. I believe it's wrong to colonize people's land, to bulldoze their homes, to cut down their olive trees, to murder their children.
Oh my God.
I also think that the guys who did all the tech, installed all the tech to make that possible, are very good programmers. You know, you got to point where people have virtue when you see it, you know. Sorry, that was a big tangent. So we talked. What have we done here? We talked about a little bit of racism. We talked. Okay, let's bring it back to money.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah, I agree. That is good, because it's showing that we have some holistic thinkers in the group, which I think is essential.
Absolutely.
Can't really have these conversations unless we're seeing them as a part of the systems that we are all living under. So got to have that holism.
Yeah. So I want to share like two anecdotes. Actually, I'm gonna hold up this book because this is a thing I can do. This is a fantastic book, Rethinking Money. Bernard Latier and Jackie Dunn wrote this text, and it's full of great stories. So, like Elizabeth, you were saying earlier that you really like having the specifics and the stories, the anecdotes. This is one that's chock full of them. Also, these guys, they are theorists, absolutely, and I don't. Sometimes people use theorists as like a derogatory term, like, oh, it works in theory or whatever. These guys are theorists. They're also very, very practical. They founded IRDA, which, like I said before, I'm bad with acronyms, but it's a clearinghouse between credit clearing, like business to business barter networks. So I'm in a business to business barter network, and it's a part of IRDA, and basically each barter network is a member of each other barter network through the organization of IRDA that was founded by these guys. And so it's insane actually how much business is done through their exchange system. And their thinking is very, very powerful when it comes to monetary policy. It's they're, you know, so, but there are two stories that are shared in that text that I think are really fantastic, or at least one of them's from that text. I got a collection back here. I don't actually remember which book the other one's from, but I think that they're two of the best stories for explaining money and like as it necessarily exists, and then explaining money in the capitalist construct. So the first one, and I think Elizabeth and I think I told the story. I'm so sorry that there was redundancy. It's going to happen. But the first one is this story. A woman walks into a hotel. She has like a room. The hotel manager says that'll be $100. She puts $100 on the counter, takes the key, walks off. Hotel manager runs into the kitchen, says to the chef, "I'm so sorry for shorting you last week." Gives the chef $100. The chef says, "Thank you." Runs out the back door of the hotel, runs across the alley, runs into the grocer's, says to the grocer, "Hey, this is for my bill. Thanks for spotting me." Grocer says, "No problem." Chef runs back across the alley. Next moment, a prostitute walks into the grocery store, which sounds like the beginning of the joke. And the grocer says, "Thank you so much for last night. That was wonderful." She winks, she leaves. She walks into the hotel, puts the $100 bill on the counter, says, "This should cover my last week's tab," and walks out. A second later, the hotel guest comes back, says, "Your beds are horribly uncomfortable," grabs her $100 bill and leaves. Sounds like a Shaggy Dog joke. It's actually not funny. It's not supposed to be a joke. But it raises this big question. Did the hotel guest pay for their room? Kind of yes and no. Like, they didn't stay in that room. They were gone just a few minutes. They came back. They got a full refund. But the hotel spent that money. And like nobody was robbed because she got the money back. But in terms of like GDP value, there's what, $400 or $500 in business, depending on how you count it, that happened. Was it legitimate? Right? And so we get this weird thing when we think about like what money is. This is the, that thing that I was talking about in the very beginning, where it's like, it's that unit of exchange, it's that store of value. All of these people had things to share with each other. And because of the society we live in, we have made this agreement that, these kinds of resources, goods and services, like money is what we use to exchange these things. But if everybody involved in the situation had known about everybody else's debts, they all could have just been like, "Oh, well, then it doesn't matter." Because, the hotel owed the chef, owed the grocer, owed the prostitute, owed the hotel. So you could just cancel them all out. You didn't need the money. But because it's money that we use, and money's a reasonable tool because it's actually really hard to coordinate all of that information. That's where the stickiness comes in. Right? Does anybody have any thoughts on that anecdote?
Yeah. it reminds me of a similar little manufactured story that helps explain monetary policy and fiscal policy and the way that we measure things. And it's got less moving parts. I'll say it real quick. So there's two people walking down the street, and they come across a carcass of a dead deer. One of them goes, "Hey, I'll pay you $10,000 to give that deer a kiss right now." The guy thinks about it, and then he goes ahead and does it. And then the guy, man, he's like, "I can't believe you just did that. Wow." But he exchanges the money, and there you go. The other guy goes, "All right, I'll give you $10,000 to do it." And he thinks about it for a second, and then he goes ahead and does it. $10,000 comes back. Now, they both look at each other, and they're like, "Did we just both kiss a dead deer for nothing?" And then one guy says, "Hell no, we just raised GDP by $20,000.
Yeah.
Right?
For real.
Because technically they did. Like, that was an exchange that did get logged, and that is how a lot of fiscal policy gets determined. Like, they essentially did something for nothing, and it got logged in this very specific and kind of high gravity way, like $20,000 raised GDP over nothing. Really interesting how that can just poof happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's super worthwhile. Also, I guess I'm slow on the pickup for these reactions. I have not used these before, but Jez, I noticed you raised your hand. Thank you.
Yes, I just figured out how to do raise hand in Zoom. I wonder, it was a white hand. I wonder if it knows that I'm white. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. There's part of me that's like, oh yeah, no, that was ridiculous. That's like so ridiculous. To me, those stories like reveal like how ridiculous money is, and like, I don't know. I guess how hard is it to coordinate all that information, to like coordinate like meeting people's needs, right? Especially because like our capacity for processing information now like is like massive. You know, we have these supercomputers, we're walking around with them in our pockets. They're interconnected globally, and we potentially could like be exchanging goods like around the globe, and meeting each other's needs, you know, and coordinating it all from like a phone or something. Like, I actually, to me, those stories like reveal some kind of fundamental like confusion. Like, so wait, why do we have money? Like, why do we need it again? I don't know why.
Yeah.
Like, it raised our GDP, but like, what the fuck is GDP? Like,
who cares?
Why do I care? Like, I care about people getting what they need. And so like, if we're able to meet each other's needs, that's great. You know, if it takes 10 transactions and we all meet each other's needs for the day or whatever, great. We did 10 exchanges, but did it have to involve money? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so that is the question. The second story, or does anybody want to add anything to that, really, to those?
Oh, I thought Elizabeth was going to chime in. It looked like you were jumping on it.
Small thing, which is just that like part of why is because we do commodify the means of life. We've commodified everything, even to the absurdity of commodifying kissing a dead deer carcass.
Yeah.
And I think that's,
somebody had to say that. It's fucking gross.
It's really gross. Thank you though, Cal, because I think the kind of the grossness I feel around that captures the grossness I feel around that food and water and shelter and education and healthcare are commodities. And it's a story that we've just so deeply ingrained and accepted that these are things that need to be bartered or exchanged. But the reason they have to be is because they're produced by people too, right? People offer these things. And those people also need to pay for food and water and shelter, right? So because the system has made commodities out of the means of life, which is as repulsive as kissing a dead deer carcass, right? We need money because if you don't pay me for my time, I can't survive, because that's the only way the system allows me to access food, access water, access shelter, healthcare, and education.
Yeah, I think there's.
Thank you for highlighting that. Because yeah, the example is intentionally ridiculous, and sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And the reality is that we have so many repulsive instances of GDP raising efforts, and that's just like a joke version of it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the very real thing that happens that has, there's some regulation against it now, but people, they fix stock prices that way. You make an agreement with somebody and you say, hey, I'm going to start a company. What does your company do? It exists, whatever. I don't know. We buy and sell toothpicks. I got 2 warehouses. I may as well put some toothpicks in it. That's what we do. And you're just at the bar with your other buddy, and he says, "Oh yeah, I just did that too. I own some warehouses." And then you write down a certificate on a cocktail napkin. It says, "This is 50% of my company. Will you buy this cocktail napkin for $1 million?" Yeah, totally. Will you buy my cocktail napkin for $1 million? Yeah, absolutely. And you just if you are if you're a publicly traded company and you report that, that's your valuation now. Somebody's paid for that company, and you paid each other. You didn't even have to exchange money because it does net out. All of a sudden, you've got a real valuation of a company on the books, according to the most commonly used method of evaluating companies, which is what did somebody pay for it? And you got a worthless company that's valuated at $1 million. And this happens all the time in different ways. People have had to get really sophisticated about how they do it, but it is constant. And so that's the reality of the deer kissing nonsense that can happen within capitalism is, the $1 million cocktail napkin. And I've seen some really cool stuff on cocktail napkins. So I'm not knocking the value that can exist on a cocktail napkin. But yeah, there's also some incredible absurdity that is allowable within the system that we have. And so I've got the second story is the story. It's a moderately oversimplified, but not really much oversimplified story about the capitalist construct of money. And so you've got a village, right? And in this village, let's say there are 10 people who do. It's for some reason a very small village. So you got 10 craftspeople who produce most of the value in the village. And one day a traveler comes to town, and he's kind of just talking to people in the village, and he talks to somebody who fishes, and somebody who's a carpenter, and a hunter, and he's like, "Oh, this is really cool." And eventually somebody's just like, "What do you do?" And he's like, "Well, I've got a trade too. I'm a banker." And they're just like, "What the hell is that?" And he's just like, "Oh, I help people to create growth and to create innovation." You're like, "Well, how do you do it?" And he's like, "Well, I've got this really cool trick." And he says, "Give me this hide of this animal," and he cuts out all these little discs, and he has this ring, and he embosses all the discs, and he says, "I've created 100 discs, and I'm going to give them to each of you." And he describes the value in terms of the things that they do. This is what each one of these discs is worth, and I'm going to loan it to you. And so you have more value now than you could normally make in a month, but it's a loan. You have to bring them back to me. And for my services, I just require 1 more disc. At the end of the year, just bring the 11 discs for the 10 that I gave you. And that's, what I receive in payment for this service of creating surplus and creating growth potential. So of course, at the end of the year, the fisherman was able, he just took all of his money, and he paid the carpenter a little bit of money, and he paid the weaver some money. And now, instead of sitting, on the beach with a couple poles kind of rigged up, he's got a net, he's got a boat, and he is bringing in the fish like mad. He paid off his loan early. He paid off his loan 3 months in because he was just crushing it because he really could not, he could not produce with the same volume that he could produce with because of the loan. So he goes to the banker. He's like, hey, thanks. Your trade is really valuable. You did allow me to innovate and to produce more. But of course, he paid off his loan early. So, there's now one disc missing from what needs to be repaid at the end of the year. So, fast forward, I'm not going to give a story for each one of the tradespeople, but come the end of the year, one of these tradespeople has no money because all 100 discs that were originally created are now back in the banker's hands because people paid back their loans. And so the banker says, oh, well, that's okay. You can default, but I own your business now. So let's just say it was the shepherd. So now this banker owns the whole shepherd's flock because the banker, in order to do his job, cannot create enough money to cover the interest on the loans. Otherwise, it wouldn't be banking. And so that's the difference between capitalism and some of the types of exchange we've been talking about. Initial thoughts before I move into some cool diagramming stuff I want to do. But give me your thoughts. Did everybody get the arithmetic first off? Because I'm not strong on the arithmetic side of things. I don't usually describe that like super heavily.
Yeah, I will say that that's a really good story to demonstrate kind of what interest is. It's something that didn't exist at all. And I think it also does a good job of demonstrating that if everyone paid off all their debt, there'd be no money and there'd be no use for bankers. And that actually this act of indebtedness and this added interest is really all they do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't actually create any new value. Like the fisherman and the carpenter, and the weaver, they created more actual physical value, right? More fish, we eat more. But the banker didn't really do anything. And the game he's playing is a game that's rigged that he will always win. So I think it does a really good job of demonstrating all those things because I've struggled with how to explain how interest creates this inescapable need to create money that doesn't exist anyway. And the only metaphor that I've heard for that I think works fairly well is the idea of the initial loan is a pool full of water. And the interest is actually needing you to overfill that, and now water to overfill the pool. Even if you fill it all the way back up, there's no water to make it overflow.
If you're drawing from the pool.
If you're drawing.
You got a bucket and it's like, here, take this bucket in this pool and fill it up more.
You took all the water out as a loan and then you're asked to put all the water back in. The interest requires you to actually keep that pool overflowing, and the water didn't exist, and you have to create it out of nothing. And then that interest is something you created, right? Maybe you collected that rainwater to put it back in the pool for interest, but that banker didn't create that. The banker started with a pool that was the size of the water that already existed, and the banker didn't make extra water.
And if we're following this metaphor, you can say, yeah, maybe you're collecting rainwater, but in the system of banking, there's no rainwater. All you can do is take money from somebody else's loan. That's the only way you can pay off a loan, is to get money from someone else's loan, which makes it less likely that they'll pay off their loan.
Yeah, and I think
they can also get money from somebody else's loan, and they can get money from somebody else's loan. But somebody has to lose the game.
And it creates this infinite loop of there will never be enough money. And I think, I don't know if anyone's seen the Money as Debt documentary. It's on YouTube. It's like a cartoon. It's very cute.
Yeah.
And it's often what I send to people. I think it's Money as Debt. There's 1 and 2, and the first one's, I think, a good place to start.
Yeah.
And it has that pool metaphor, and it does go into a lot of metaphor and a lot of explanation of interest and what banking is and how it is this inescapable infinite system in a finite world, and those just are not compatible.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I've talked to people about this in other economics organizing, sometimes people are like, oh, so what? That's why there's the growth imperative. The economy has to keep growing. People have to keep on taking out loans. And yeah, you're paying off your loan with somebody else's loan, but they can always get enough. They can declare bankruptcy. They can, how much damage can it do? Well, the derivatives market is $700 trillion in total value. That is how much more debt there is than money. $700 trillion more debt than money.
It's just beyond abstract. I mean, $700 trillion can never exist. Like, it couldn't be printed. The whole thing is preposterous. Yeah. And I mean, this is all great, and I'm feeling very enriched by this conversation. I would also wonder about our timeline, how long you kind of allotted for this, and also I'm definitely excited to ground a little bit into what Favor is doing, and just like getting away from these wild abstractions of 700 trillions and things like that.
Absolutely.
But I mean, yeah, carry on with the agenda, whatever you've got.
Yeah, and I thank you for that time check, because sometimes when these things get going, I'll just keep going. And actually, in all honesty, being stopped is probably a service to me. I'm going to throw out. I had one more, essentially a diagram I wanted to draw that separates the two different things that people talk about with regard, or like two different conceptions of capitalism, and show that to you guys. And then I think actually, and I wasn't even necessarily going to showcase Favor, but I think it's a very reasonable thing to do, and maybe that's a good wrap up. Does that sound good for you guys? Sweet. I'm gonna do a quick screen share. So I'm gonna do like a kind of a digital whiteboard type thing. So a lot of times when I'm looking at, and I spend maybe more time than is healthy reading things that people write about why they love capitalism. Sorry for just leaving you guys with a stark white screen. I don't know if it's like how brutal that is. But what people always go to is the free market. It is like the number one thing that people are just like, capitalism's great. The free market is important. The free market is crucial for human life. And there's this thing where when you actually go back to Adam Smith, he actually talks about the free market, but he doesn't claim credit for it. And there's this interesting thing where like he talks about the importance of this thing in terms of human life, that we're like, people need to be able to make trades with whom they choose, so that a person can look at, like, let's just say this dot right here is one person who sells pots, and this pot guy right here is another person who sells pots. Like, if I'm this person and I've got some money, the fact that I can choose between A or B, and I can tell my friend, like, oh, this guy makes better pots, and that might make this person wealthier, is actually very natural, and it's very important to human life, and incentive structures, psychology. There are all of these benefits in that. And so this is, this creates a network structure where people are exchanging in lots of different directions, and some people are going to win more or less within this structure, and that's basically true. And what you're going to end up seeing in terms of wealth disparity is something like a Pareto distribution, right? Pareto distribution is going to look a little like this. Let's just say it doesn't really have a bottom, because nobody's, for the most part, when there's any other contrivance, nobody's going to make no money. Almost everybody is going to make, like, if like this is enough to get by, yeah, you're going to get some really, really rich people. And the thing that I believe that everybody, because I saw it a lot during the Occupy days, everybody that was involved in that movement saw a lot of was these graphs that circulated, which is like, what do people think is a reasonable distribution of wealth for, based on like rewards and disparities and motivation and ambition that you see in society, and what do you think is the actual distribution? And most people would say that, like, that's a reasonable distribution. If you're decently educated, you're going to say that, like, a Pareto curve is basically functional for society, and that if there's a problem in society, then it's with income disparity. It's probably because the curve looks a little more like this and actually does dip down all the way to zero. And that's, I'm on the background still. Try to never draw in the background. Talking and drawing at the same time is a bad idea. But you know, this curve touches all the way to zero. There are a lot of people in such extreme poverty, they really have nothing, and that's a problem. And so people will say, you know, this should be fixed because this is what society looks like. And, you know, that's awful. This is wrong. It's like, you know, just morally bankrupt. And then you show them the actual curve, the actual income disparity. And, you know, for everybody, I don't know if anybody ever didn't see those charts, but they look a little bit more like, I mean, pretend that's a curve that makes sense.
Oh, no. Oh.
And we talk about
that reflects like actuality.
Yeah. I mean, this is not high math. This is me doodling on a screen. But but for real, look it up. It's really bonkers. Like, people think that, you know, society is out of whack, and they think that the out of whack looks like that. And it needs to be corrected to something like this. And there are some people that say everything should be exactly the same. And I think those people have never met juggalos. But the actuality is, this is where society really is. The actual wealth disparity difference between the 0.01% and the people right at that line of 1% is greater than the difference between 1%ers and the poorest person you've ever met. It is insane. And so that's the reality of where we actually live. And I'm gonna just go ahead and take this out, jump up here, Shift 5. So if we've got this structure over here, and this is a network structure, or like in, you know, permaculture, we were calling them mycelial structures. They're a lot like mushrooms. You know, in terms of the webs that are created that give architecture. Like, a mycelium really is an architectural thing. It supports a lot of life. You know, that's one kind of structure, and it has certain facets. And it's the thing that when people talk about the free market, they're talking about your right to do business with anybody. And the thing that they're constantly defending is that it's okay for one node to be bigger, and this structure needs to exist. There's this other structure that comes out of the story we just told of the banker. And the way this actually plays out is, there's one bank, and it's owned by 4 people, or 4, you know, entities, and they borrow from it, but they also own it. That's a weirdness that we'll talk about in other episodes. So that's kind of one entity, but, you know, let's leave that as an aside. And all of the money that exists that they interact with, it's called the M0. This is all the money in the Federal Reserve, and shared by commercial banks. And trade and, you know, reconciliation happens between all of them all the time. I don't know why. They're basically the same entity. But that's the M0. All of these banks lend money to little banks, of which there are fewer and fewer every day because these banks keep on buying them. But these banks lend money to little banks on the exact same terms that we just described, in this, you know, with the leather discs, right? And so the lending goes this way, but obviously the extraction is greater. And then these banks lend money to businesses, people, you know, that's basically it. It's either a business or person. So these are every home loan, every business loan. And so all of those things exist out here, and they're all feeding this extractive structure that we just described with the disks, but they're doing business with each other in a network structure, right? And even sometimes the banks, banks need things built. So banks will do business, they don't mind playing along in the network structure. And because most activity, and this is the M3, sorry, and the M1 is up here in the middle. And that's just in terms of economics, how these portions of money supply are referred to.
What happened to M2?
Oh, sorry.
What is M2?
Yeah, it's just different layers of banking.
Oh, okay.
It's really, sorry, it's bizarre. They're like, and in all honesty, I don't even know if it's relevant anymore. When these terms were created, there were hundreds and hundreds of banks. But big bank takes little bank has been happening now since the GATT treaty, like 1951. So I don't even know if there's a functional difference between the M1 and the M2 anymore. But these guys have everybody, hold on, I'm gonna stick with my pointer thing. These guys have everybody convinced that this network structure is capitalism because it's what we experience. But this existed long before capitalism. It's what Adam Smith observed and wrote about when he was instantiating capitalism. So if it existed before the theory of capitalism and was observed by the founding theorists of capitalism, then it isn't capitalism. The same way Jesus was a Jew, Buddha was a Hindu, like Adam Smith was talking about a thing that existed before him. And does that analogy make sense to you guys? Like, you ever heard like the Jesus wasn't a Christian thing? Like, Jesus was a Jewish man. Like Adam Smith was talking about, fulfilling the law that he saw, the free market. This thing over here is not the free market. This is an extractive structure that was built on top of the free market to take value away from people and center it and centralize power. And that's the thing that empires have done forever, is just invent new ways to centralize power. And that's what we have that really is capitalism. The end.
Question about, you're trying to make a distinction between the free market and capitalism, and I think it does make sense to do that, though. Let's see. I'm trying to clarify like how to do it. You're saying like is the extractive system is capitalism.
Mm-hmm. I think it best serves us to think of capitalism as that, because the other thing has always existed. It can be repressed, and that was the thing that Adam Smith was observing, was that the feudal structure did a lot to repress free trade. If he was responding to mercantilism and the kind of vestiges of this kind of feudal lordly fiefdom thing, that, and trying to figure out how it could fit into this new industry idea. And he was saying like all of these like noble powers, which really mercantilism was like pupa, like a larval state of capitalism. And he was looking at mercantilism and he's just like, this is still just noble lords with serfs. And there's so much restriction that's artificial. Mm-hmm. People want to do business with each other openly and not be functionally still owned by the nobility. And and the free market is being repressed. That's like Adam Smith fans right now are like clawing their eyes out, because that is like I'm going to admit that is a horrible oversimplification of what is like a really long book. Like, but
all right.
That's
no, yeah. My philosophy professor would agree with you. He was like an Adam Smith scholar. He was just like, I mean, it was very interesting to hear from him, because actually even one of the first things that he taught us was, his name is Jack Weinstein. Yeah, maybe his Wikipedia page will get like major hits now, which I started.
I mean, this video is going to get major hits. So. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna tweet it. Anyway, he taught this. Adam Smith wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Before he wrote Wealth of Nations. I haven't read it yet, but I really want to.
It's super fascinating, he said it's actually like essential to read before the Wealth of Nations, because it provides this moral like theory for why the free market would actually be a respectful exchange. Like it would be an empathetic exchange, because he's arguing that human, what he calls sympathy, is a sense of fellow feeling that humans have with each other. And because of that feeling, like I won't take advantage of someone else, or people won't take advantage of each other. And this is actually, this sympathy is the invisible hand. Like it's the thing of like, we will take care of each other and we will not try to take more than what other people have.
And people do. Yeah.
Well, have definitely like run with one side of Smith that serves the extractive system for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I've been talking a lot. I don't want to hear other voices. I don't know. Jamie's here. Jamie, you've been here. What are you doing? What are you thinking of all this?
I really appreciate you going into that explaining the difference between capitalism and the free market. Like I have a degree in economics, and not once did it occur to me that those were two different things until I went to a DSA meeting and they said, oh, those are two different things. I was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh. So I think that's like one thing that can't be emphasized enough, like, because that is like people do equate those things, the free market and capitalism.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that if like you kind of like approach the conversation from that angle, like I think people are almost more likely to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think you did three things really well in that display. And the first is that what was Jamie's talking about, this distinction between capitalism and the free market. I think it's the second thing is I think it's really important, especially when you talk about these like complex systemic structures, that we're very clear on the definition of the words we're using. And so I think it's really helpful when you break it down, when you not only define the word you're using, but you also are able to contrast it to maybe the thing that people can often confuse it with, and how those are two separate things. And so buying that space is really helpful, which is the third thing that I want to bring up that does, is it helps bring people to the table. It's like, I can accept that we both value freedom. We both want to have the freedom to buy from the artisan we think is the best one, right? That's different from an extractive capitalist hierarchy of like the way the banking system works. And that's something that comes up in conversations about, you know, capitalism, socialism, communism. These are all isms. These are all like really big words. And even the people who talk about them in their own circles, I don't even know if they know that they're on the same definition of it. And so this was very helpful to clarify, and very helpful to clarify for people when you invite them into the conversation. And then there was one other thing I wanted to say, but I forgot it now. The fourth was that you went back to the source material. So like, I think Jez, you picked up on that, like, if you actually go back to Adam Smith, like he's being grossly oversimplified, has been grossly misinterpreted, but that misinterpretation and that simplification serves the status quo. And that's why that oversimplification and that, just that basic interpretation has been so widespread, because it does service this extractive system. So I think I appreciate those four things and kind of everything that's just transpired here. And I hope that when we welcome people into this conversation, they're able to enter at a point where that like clear definitions, clear distinctions between things, you know, like touching on that, we share the freedom value. We just don't share that this is the way to get that freedom. Going back to source material, and just being able to have that conversation where people can enter into it and still feel grounded in their values, because they understand that there's a difference between whatever this, you know, capitalist extractive abstract system is, and like whatever the, you know, mycelium is. It's important that they are at least able to access those terms when they have this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Cool. Well, that's all I wanted to say about what money is. I should shoehorn the favor in at the end of this. The favor is basically not that. Cool, we're done. There's no extractive part in the favor. It's actually just straight pure exchange. You can have debt to the system. There's no interest on the debt. That just means you can spend before you earn or when you haven't earned quite that much. And it's more or less that simple. There's also, you know, there's a transaction fee that gets paid to the network, but the network is a member of the system. It also spends with people in the system. So no value ever leaves. There's no extraction because the money doesn't go anywhere. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
Hey, Deacon, I know you've shared with other folks, you've got like links and stuff to this
Absolutely.
work. Yeah, I'd love for you to kind of plug some of that in the chat or say it now so that we can follow up.
So I will do both. I'm going to say it and plug it into the chat. The website is favor.solutions. .solutions is my new favorite top-level domain, like .com or .org. .solutions is now available. So this project is living at favor.solutions. The website is seriously like, I sat down and after a conversation with the SPDC, the Social Permaculture Design and Facilitators, I just wrote this I wrote this manifesto in HTML originally, just so I could push the website up immediately. So it looks like that. It looks like, if anybody who remembers like GeoCities, like this is what my first GeoCities website looks like, more or less. It's just a straight page. But I've gone back in and I've inserted some YouTube videos, and I'll insert this video in there. But it's an explanation of the system, and just it tells how it works. And I added Adam Brock's onboarding video, so you can see the ledger in there, and anybody can see, you know, the ledger, how it works. Yeah, favor.solutions.
Can we
Are you
also
going to do a follow-up to this?
Say what?
Go for it, Jamie.
Okay. I was just going to ask if we could also share the names of all the resources that we talked about during this.
Oh, look, yeah, the texts and yeah, goodness. Okay, so we've got most recently Wealth of Nations, and
Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Theory of Moral Sentiments. If I spelled sentiments correctly.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's right.
You mentioned Rethinking Money, Deacon.
Yeah, Rethinking Money.
And I can send the links, Deacon, if you haven't seen them, but I suggested watching Money is Debt on YouTube. And I also, I can send you the link to, there's a very good video that has those 3 curves that you displayed that came out back.
Oh yeah,
that's
a good resource.
I
want to see that.
That video is very well done, and it does a very good job of saying, like, this is what people think it is, this is what people think is fair, and this is what it actually is. And I think they do an excellent job of that. So I'm happy to find that link, Deacon, send it to you, and then you can distribute to everyone else. I put that in my list of things to do.
Totally. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What else came up, just for anybody who wants to?
I repped David Graeber's book on debt. It is a tome. I do not,
Oh, that's Debt the First 5,000 Years?
Yeah, Debt the First 5,000 Years. It is a lot to get through.
I think I'm going to just look at my bookshelf because I know I have a good book, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think it's called Paper Promises.
Ooh, that's a good title.
And it does go over fiat currency.
Yeah.
So let me just get up for 1 second because my
And
bookshelf is there.
I'm going to show this
And
one.
that's a great one.
Yeah. This is a fantastic book. Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. I'm trying to hold it to reduce.
Oh yeah, I still haven't read it.
Yes.
Oh, it's really good. It's funny because this looks like I haven't read it either because it's so crisp. But I think it's the third time I've bought this book. I keep giving it away because like you have to. It's like every now and then you have a conversation. It's like, you have to read this. Take my copy. I'll get another one. Like, so I've actually probably never even opened this book. I just always have one ready.
You're passing it around. It's like the $100.
Yeah, it's like the $100. Except I have to keep on getting a new one. I don't know. It's in there somewhere.
I'd put a vote in. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was gonna say it's Paper Promises by Philip Coogan.
Cool.
And it's Coggan, but Philip is spelled with one L. And this is from the Goucher College Library and may need to be returned at some point.
You stole that book.
Uh-oh.
I accidentally stole it. It got moved with all my other stuff.
Oh, it was Coogan. Sorry.
Yeah. Here, I'll hold it up for you. It says.
Oh, yeah, I was way off.
That really looks like Coggan.
Coggan?
Is it Coggan?
Anyway, I don't know. Actually, I have no idea.
I have no idea.
I guess that is how you'd spell cog, right?
I don't know. People have weird names.
So those are things that came up or were directly relevant. I'm going to throw out a few more shout outs for anybody if this is on YouTube and you've gotten to this point, you really give a shit. So I'm going to throw out a few other names. Juliet Shore, she wrote Plenitude. It's phenomenal. It's practical. It's not like it is like, here's what to do. Like, this is how you use a 3D printer to change the economy. This is how you restructure your business to change the economy. This is like, and it's good. Juliet Shore, she walked out of a economics chair position at Harvard because they didn't take the wisdom. Joanna Priova wrote Economic Resilience, I think is the name of her book. Yeah, it's got a very, very simple title. I'm really bad with really super simple titles sometimes. Remembering them is hard. But Joanna Priova, she, I believe, is a founder, I want to say, of Transition LA, I think. Brilliant, great analogies. I use her analogies all the time. She's really wonderful with the metaphor and explaining things. Who else? Oh, Adam Brock. Adam Brock wrote Change Here Now. It's got some excellent chapters on economics and just change making in general. Change Here Now is a manual for changing things. It's a fantastic text. I'll draw from that a lot as well in these discussions. And I think those are most of the heavy hitters that are coming to my mind at this moment.
I threw a couple into the chat as
Sweet.
well, like Slow Money by Woody Cash, and that one we mentioned earlier about the dude who basically just ditched the modern economy and went to live in the desert. And then actually, just while we're on this and while I was finally able to plug in my computer at 4%, I thought I was going to lose everyone. I'll type in the book Land by, what's his name? Also super simple name. This book is an incredible resource about, it's basically a permaculture perspective on the way that we derive wealth from land, and it's incredibly solutions oriented. So the dude was groomed in Wall Street and came up with that kind of formal understanding, and then wrote this fantastic book. It's a paradigm shifting book, and it's about what we can do to shift the world's land-based economies, because that's like where so much of the value that anyone actually owns is tied up is in real estate and land. So that one is fantastic. And
you got to remember his name because we can't search it based on the name Land. I'm trying right now, but it's just impossible.
No, I know. It's on North Atlantic Books. I'll say that.
That's probably
much.
enough.
But what is that dude's name? He's a good dude.
Yeah, I would hope so.
And it is by, where is it? They're not giving us the name.
North Atlantic. Why don't you have a search bar? They just have pagination. It's no good.
Martin Adams. That's right. So
Okay,
Martin Adams. And so also, he is so committed to getting this message out that he has made the whole book available for free, so you can go find the ebook if you search it, or I have it bookmarked somewhere, so I'd be able to give it to you. But that's another book, like Sacred Economics for you, Deacon. Like, I've definitely like bought multiple copies of it just to have on hand so I can give it to people, because it's also like very dense, but it's only like 200 pages or less. So fantastic resource.
Here's the read online link. I just threw it in the chat.
Yep, Unitism. Cool.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
And then Elizabeth just added the best that money can't buy. That's the Venus Project guy, right?
Yeah, so that does a good job of, and I haven't actually finished reading it yet, but he talks about the resource-based economy, which I think would be very complementary to this idea of an economy based on land. So resource-based economy in a nutshell is every resource on the planet is common wealth of all beings.
Mm-hmm.
And we just take stock of all of those, and we learn ways to make sure that we all get what we need from all of the resources. So we get rid of borders, we get rid of this idea of property, and we just take stock of what is on this planet and what do we need from it.
Yeah, I looked into him a little bit last night. Obviously not a big deep dive, but after we talked, and he seems like a utopianist, and utopianists always creep me out, mostly because I've read too much sci-fi.
He does. I will fully admit that the Venus Project gives off a utopian, like cultish vibe. But that's only because of the people interpreting what Jacques Fresco actually said.
Okay.
So if you go straight to Jacques Fresco, who is now dead, and you listen to his lectures on YouTube, or you look at the book that he wrote, it's a much different experience than talking to somebody who's interpreting that or is from the Venus Project.
Or
and that's something
design their website.
It's a very like
it's okay. It's totally fun.
And it's a whole thing, but like the idea of a resource-based economy is the idea that has been most aligned with what I would like to see happen. And so
I also don't want to make you an apologist for somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm apologizing for them, not because they would apologize, but because I am sorry for them. But like, I think a resource-based economy is something worth looking into, and that's a good book that is directly from Jacques Fresco.
No doubt. And Jacques Fresco, I think also he's just a really interesting character. I actually think he's kind of in the same camp as like Buckminster Fuller. He's a modern day Da Vinci. Like, he had his hands in so many different projects and ideas, and was such a pioneer on so many levels. Like, at the very least, whether you agree with them or not, it's like having this conversation without having an understanding of Adam Smith or Karl Marx. I mean, it's like these are important characters to know about, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for echoing that, Cal. And I do agree with the Buck Fuller comparison. Like, Jacques Fresco's with that. He's in that level.
Totally.
His followers may not be. The people who are trying to like sustain his legacy are definitely not.
That's really too bad.
The source of it is good. It is sad. And you're gonna see me online saying that, and like, sorry, thank you for the training, and like, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, the same things happen with so many people, you know. Jungians are not Carl Jung, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a thing that happens with teachings. And it's one of the reasons I'm very averse to isms and anything moving in that direction, because it sours, you know. It's really sad. All right, I feel like I'm saving the chat.
Oh wait, one more.
Okay, cool.
Sylvia Federici.
Awesome.
This is an amazing book called Caliban and the Witch, which I've only begun reading, but it's an amazing like analysis of Marxism that reveals like how much of capitalism is actually built on unpaid labor and specifically women's labor.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's a super important book actually, which I need to read still.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you so much. How does everybody feel? Feel like a good ending?
Just in time to howl too. I just heard some outside my window.
Oh yeah, it's the howling moment.
Howling time?
Yep.
There's some howling thing that's happening. There's a Denver poet apparently who started this thing. He's a cool guy. His name's Bryce. He writes good poems.
Is it the Solidarity Howl or something?
I don't know if there's any solidarity involved. I think it's just a lot of noise.
No, it became that.
Oh, okay. It's developing meaning. So, which is
Everyone at 8
It's like
p.m.
me.
in your time zone, wherever you are, you go outside and you howl. And there are some places where you do it, and it's just crazy. Everyone in your neighborhood is howling. And in my neighborhood, they're setting off fireworks and really getting into it. And it's just like this funny kind of human emergent phenomenon where everyone's like, we're all in this together.
yeah.
Let's-
So you gotta get your shoes.
let's howl about it.
59.
Nice.
Yeah, buddy, if you want
Reminds me of
one.
I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore.
Yeah,
Ah.
I think that would be welcome. Cool. Well,
Um,
I'll let you guys,
Cool talk, guys.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. Thank you for joining me here. And I've scheduled future firesides for just an hour, but if there's this much value, I'm probably not gonna cut it off. You guys can probably tell that about me. You guys, thank you so much for the feedback, the other analogies, filling in the things I couldn't remember. That's amazing. Yeah.
Do you have a concept already in mind for the next one? Like,
Nope.
or no? Okay, it's in
I'm-
development.
Yeah, I'm open to suggestions.
I don't have one offhand, but
Cool. Well, I will remain open until I have a good one. And then I'm probably just going to keep doing this as long as it makes sense.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Deacon, for
Cool.
hosting us.
thanks. Yeah,
Thank you.
nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, nice to meet y'all.
All right,
Good night,
goodbye.
everyone.
Bye.
Oh.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, Alexa.